A sick Neanderthal, in a cold cave, in agony, was somehow dosing himself with a painkiller and a moldy antibiotic. You slice your hand open on a sharp edge of stone. The cut is deep. It is bleeding fast. There is no pharmacy on the corner, no clean white bandage, no doctor to call, no little tube of cream waiting on a shelf. There is only you, your two hands, and whatever happens to be growing in the dirt around your feet. So what do? For almost the entire length of the human story, this was not a thought experiment. For roughly 300,000 years, every wound, every fever, every shattered bone, and every rotting tooth had to be survived with nothing you would recognize as medicine. And still, your ancestors lived, they healed, they grew old enough to pass down both their genes and their hard-won knowledge in an unbroken chain that ends, right now, with you. Here is the part that should stop you cold. A simple infected cut, the kind you would fix today without a second thought, was once a coin flip with death. For most of history, a scratch could kill you. So how did human beings survive for thousands of generations in a world where the smallest injury could turn deadly? The answer is far stranger and far more clever than they just got lucky. Start with the body itself. Long before any plant or any remedy, you are carrying the oldest medicine there is, built directly into your flesh. When you bleed, your blood clots. When something gets in, the area swells, reddens, and grows hot, because your body is flooding the wound with cells that hunt invaders. That throbbing pain you hate, it is an instruction. It forces you to stop, to protect the injury, to rest while the repair crews work. Your ancestors did not understand the biology, but they trusted the signals, and the signals were usually right. Then came the next layer of survival, the world around them. Imagine an early human, in pain, chewing on the bark of a willow tree. It is bitter, it is unpleasant, but within an hour, the ache in the joints begins to fade. Willow bark contains a chemical called salicylic acid, and if that word sounds familiar, it should, because salicylic acid is the natural ancestor of the pill in your medicine cabinet called aspirin. People were swallowing the active ingredient in aspirin thousands of years before anyone could spell it. And willow was only the beginning. Here's where the evidence gets genuinely astonishing, because it does not come from us guessing, it comes from the mouths of the dead. In a cave called El Cedron, in northern Spain, scientists recovered the remains of Neanderthals who lived around 49,000 years ago. Neanderthals, your close human cousins, a separate kind of human, often dismissed as dumb brutes. In 2017, a team led by the researcher Laura Weyrich studied the hardened plaque on their teeth. The crusty buildup a dentist scrapes off, which traps tiny chemical traces of everything that passed through the mouth. What they found rewrote the story. One of these Neanderthals had a painful dental abscess, an infection rotting into his jaw, and a nasty stomach parasite on top of it. And locked in the plaque on his teeth were two things he had been eating that had no business being food. The first was poplar, a tree that, like willow, contains salicylic acid, nature's aspirin, a natural painkiller. The second was a trace of penicillium mold. Stop and let that land. Penicillium is the exact mold that, tens of thousands of years later, a scientist named Alexander Fleming would turn into penicillin, the first true antibiotic and one of the most important drugs ever made. A sick Neanderthal, in a cold cave, in agony, was somehow dosing himself with a painkiller and a moldy antibiotic. Does that sound like a dumb brute to you? It was not a one-time accident either. An earlier study of the same site, led by the researcher Karen Hardy, found traces of yarrow and chamomile in Neanderthal teeth. Both plants are bitter. Both are nearly worthless as food. Both have been used as medicine for thousands of years. A creature would only choke down something that bitter and that useless for calories if it was after something else, relief. Now, jump forward in time to a body so well preserved it still has skin. In 1991, hikers in the Alps found a man frozen in the ice, perfectly mummified, dead for around 5,300 years. We call him Otzi, the Iceman, and Otzi was carrying a tiny survival kit. Among his belongings were two lumps of birch polypore, a fungus that grows on birch trees and contains natural compounds that fight bacteria and intestinal worms. When researchers examined his gut, they found exactly that problem. Whipworm, a parasite that would have given him cramps and misery. Otzi was not carrying that fungus for fun. He was carrying his medicine, packed for the journey, the way you might pack pills before a long trip. So early humans had painkillers, antibiotics of a kind, and antiparasitics. But what about the things you cannot fix by swallowing a plant? What about a broken leg? Think about it honestly. Out in the wild, a broken leg is close to a death sentence. You cannot walk. You cannot run from danger. You cannot follow the group as it moves toward food and water. You cannot even reach the next stream to drink. Alone, you die, not from the break, but from everything the break stops you from doing. Which is why the most powerful medicine ancient humans ever discovered was not a plant at all. It was each other. Return to a cave, this one called Shanidar, in the mountains of northern Iraq. There, the archaeologist Ralph Selecki uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal man we now call Shanidar I, and his bones tell a staggering story. This man was a catalog of catastrophe. He had a crushing injury to the left side of his face that likely left him blind in one eye. He had bony growths deep in his ear canals that probably left him partly deaf. One arm was withered and useless, possibly amputated. He had healed fractures across his body. The researcher Eric Trinkhaus, who studied these bones for decades, saw the obvious truth in them. A half-blind, half-deaf, one-armed man living in the Ice Age could not possibly have survived on his own. And yet he did not just survive. He grew old. That means someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone shared the kill with a man who could not hunt, dragged him along when the band moved, and sat with him through the cold. The deepest medicine in human history is not in any plant. It is the decision to care for a person who can give you nothing back. That instinct to keep the weak alive is tens of thousands of years old, and it is sitting inside you right now. But here is the twist that almost no one expects. You would assume that as humans got smarter and more settled, they got healthier. The opposite is true. For most of the journey, your ancestors lived in small, mobile bands, spread thin across the land, and disease struggled to spread through groups that small and that scattered. Then, around 10,000 years ago, humans did something brand new. They settled down. They built villages. They crowded together with their animals, their stored grain, and their waste. And disease threw a party. Crowding, livestock, and dirty water bred epidemics the old foragers had rarely faced. In one of history's cruelest jokes, the progress of settling down made human beings sicker than they had been in hundreds of thousands of years of wandering. They even tried surgery and survived it. Across the ancient world, archaeologists keep finding skulls with neat holes cut into them, a practice called trepanation, which means cutting or scraping an opening through the bone of a living skull. It sounds like instant death, but here is the shock. The edges of many of these holes are smooth and healed over, which means the bone kept growing, which means the patient lived. Some skulls show 2 or 3 healed holes from separate operations on the same person. Without anesthesia, without antiseptic, ancient humans opened a living skull, and the patient walked away, more than once. So look at what they actually had. Painkillers from bark, antibacterials from mold and honey, wound cleaners, even the maggots that ate away rotting flesh and left the healthy tissue clean, splints, surgery, and a tribe that refused to let the wounded die alone. And now, look at your own medicine cabinet. Your aspirin is willow bark, purified. Your antibiotics are the descendants of that penicillin mold the L-Sidron Neanderthal carried in his mouth. Doctors today still use medical maggots, cleared for use in modern hospitals, to clean wounds that will not heal. They still pack stubborn wounds with medical honey. Almost every modern miracle is something your ancestors had already found, by trial and error and unbearable pain, scattered in the plants and the dirt and the mold around them, waiting tens of thousands of years for us to give it a name. So go back to the beginning. You slice your hand open on a sharp edge of stone. There is no pharmacy, no doctor, no tube of cream. But there never really needed to be, because the willow is already growing by the river, the honey is already in the hive, and your tribe is already turning to look. And you are the living proof that for 300,000 years that was enough.